ideal client avatar
Hmm.
as opposed to this, hey, if you're a Star Wars nerd looking to lose weight, and
Yeah.
instead getting to more of the like 35 plus male problems.
Yeah.
And so that was a it's like a busy task, but it just
Yeah.
needed to get done. So I'm excited for that.
I love
But I
it.
realized over the last 4 or 5 months, I just kind of cooked my email list and it didn't like the messaging that I was putting out didn't align with everyone because everyone came in as 17-year-olds, women, like basically just people who weren't ideal fit. So that was
Right. Right. Yeah, I love it. There has to be a healthy auditing. You know, it's funny. You run just to kind of give you guys some context too. Brandy and Paul have heard this, but for you, Ed and Sergio, I ran my own offer. The MetaMail project was a fitness coaching offer for a lot of males. White collar, that kind of thing. It was a 10K offer, 90 days, and one thing that I often did a lot was every quarter or maybe every other quarter, I had to always make sure that the language that I was using in my messaging was aligned because, as you know, market shifts, right? And as byproduct of that, you might be using outdated language and maybe the pain points that buyers would use to describe their scenario, I was using adjectives in which those weren't the ways that they would describe it anymore. And so I needed to make sure that I was in tune with that. So it allows you to have more message to market fit. You guys have heard that before. And so what's interesting is, again, this is all transferable to sales and really dialing into what your buyers are saying and not recreating the narrative. Example, when a customer says they're feeling stuck, let's use that as a way to segue into it. And then you hear the word stuck. But the filter through which you hear that statement, your brain has a different level of labeling and association. So you might go, okay, gotcha. And Sergio, and I know you mentioned before you feel like you're not making progress. Now, again, they might go internally. I said I don't see it like that, but yeah, sure. What's yeah, that makes sense, Sergio. Now here's the thing: they said the word stuck. So what does that mean? The principle here is do not be clever, be clear. And so mirroring that language, again, Sales 101 allows you to get that advantage to where your buyer feels heard and they also feel understood. Make sense, team? Cool. There's a lot of good things that you guys are sharing. Brandy, you kind of talked about it a little bit. Paul, you touched upon it. So I'll give you guys dealer's choice today. There's two ways that we can take our call today. I always try to do a little bit of homework and give you guys some insight. We can talk. I'll give you guys two directions, and I'll let you guys have dealer's choice here, what you want to dig onto, and we'll do some role playing stuff. We can talk a little bit about how to handle exit windows that buyers give you earlier in the sales call, and kind of how to talk through some of those talk tracks, or we can talk about kind of what Brandy touched upon too, which I think is also important, which is how do you deal with rejection? How do you compartmentalize that mentally? And then how do you use that to be able to come back even stronger than before? And so if you like option A, drop one in the chat. If you want to go to option B, drop a two in the chat. Let me hear it from you guys. And if we're split on the difference, then I get to choose. That's how it goes. And so, all right. Paul says B. Ed says B. Sergio, what you got? Let me hear from you guys. Sergio says B. Okay, so we want to talk a little bit about the mindset. Let's have some fun with this. All right. I this is a fun subject for me. So there's going to be a few things here. I'll tell you to write down just because I think it's important to the nature of what we're trying to tackle today, right? And so I think when it comes to this idea of no, most communicators, most sales professionals, especially new ones or ones that are kind of struggling and they're in a rut or whatever you want to call it, they live in this fear of rejection. Right? Why? Because naturally we're human. Humans, we don't like rejection. It's kind of like when in high school you asked the girl out and she said no, thank you, right? Ouch, it stings. And so what happens is that to pre-frame that, what do we try to do? We try to make sure that we're asking perfect questions. We try to make sure that the tone is the most smooth. We try to finesse our way to a yes. But I think the truth is just by a show of hands, any of you guys read there was an interesting book I read 2 years ago. It was The Definitive Guide on Handling Rejection. Does that sound familiar to anyone here? Okay, cool. If I remember the author, I will quote it. But what the book talked about, just to kind of give you some context, it laid out a simple plan. And this is important to write down. Rejection is not the enemy. Rejection is the path. Now, kind of sounds obvious, but let me give you some context on that. You see, you're not failing because you're hearing no, because often in sales we hear a lot of no's. What's interesting is, and what the book talked about is that the reason why you're failing is because you are not hearing no enough. Because that means that you are not certainly playing full out. Why do I say that? The reason why I say that is because, again, rejection, if it goes back to like human behavior, rejection feels daunting, right? Um, One of the things that human behavior talks about it, it shows that our brains are wired to avoid rejection. You guys know this in your own personal life. And so that level of instinct where we don't want to feel that rejection is part of this idea of survival. And so, in the context of sales, fear can hold us back. Now, there's two types of fear. Fear can be a motivator or it can be a paralyzer, right? But in this context, fear has to become a motivator because recognizing that when you hear a no isn't part of personal rejection, but rather just a natural part of the process, what this allows us to do is reframe our perspective on a negative thing. Are y'all tracking so far? Yes and yes? Cool. Um, so let somebody in the room here. Um, so I think I'm missing her name right now. I'm trying to remember, but the author, she talks about this concept. I think it's simple, but it's brilliant. It's called go for no. Write that down. But go for no. And essentially, to kind of compartmentalize her theory here is she talks about setting a goal. If when we as sales professionals, we will normally set a goal where we're like, okay, I want to get 2 wins today or 2 yeses today. She talks about setting a goal of getting 5 no's, 10 no's. And interestingly enough, instead of like fearing the resistance, go ahead and try and seek it. Go ahead and try and lean into the resistance because every no becomes a stepping stone naturally to your next yes. Um, Fenton is the last name. I can't remember the first name, but Fenton, the guy, it was a male and female, but the male author, he suggests this idea that setting goals, when you set goals just for the sake of getting yeses responses, but not for the sake of getting no responses, that shift in your mindset, it ultimately makes rejection way more measurable and it makes it expected as part of the success equation, right? Because I think when we often get it, it's too much of a hard hit, not only to our central nervous system, but also to our ego, right? Brandy, what are you thinking so far? Let's do a little bit of a sanity check as I talk through that.
I like that. I actually just put in there what I found it on Amazon. I think it's the book you were talking about when they say definitive rejection.
Yes, there it is. You got it.
Yeah. I was like, let me see what this book is. I need to get this because I feel like, yeah, for me, like I've had this pressure because our salesperson's like going on, maternity leave and she's really great and has this high closing rate. Like there's no way I can beat it. So I come in and I've never really come in with pressure. I just like say, hey, this is what I do. I know you should do this with me. So I feel like I have been like being like, I gotta get this, yes. And so when I hear a no, I'm like, shit.
Yeah.
But
It
now,
does
like, I
happen
feel like,
there.
okay, great. Like, for like, for tonight, I'm like, I'm gonna like try to get the no because I've been getting stuck on people saying I think about it. And so
Yeah.
now I just want to like really be like, no, I want to get the no and not
Right.
be okay with it.
Yeah, be okay with it. It's so again, I reference this because I find it to just be a common pattern in my life. But for those of you that don't know or have not heard, I run a sales team north of 500 people, right? And so, we have top performers inside this company that are doing probably a little over 500,000 a year in comms. There's about 5 or 6 individuals that do a little bit over half a year. And if there is one pattern that I've been able to recognize from these guys, is they have this level of call it emotional Teflon. And what I mean by that, it's like nothing they run through no's. I mean, an insane amount of no's, but it's almost like they're just impervious to it, right? Tell me yes, tell me no, tell me now, I gotta go. Are you in or are you out? Now, as a idea, that sounds so simple, but you can't be as crass about that, right? Generally, we want to make sure that we're flexing empathy, but the idea that lives behind that is that if I do everything on the call, T's crossed, I's dotted, I'm okay with walking away with that call. And so what does that mean? That means that your process, because again, sales is a data-driven process, your process has to be built upon a formula that gives you more success than less success. Because I don't judge the character of my sales skills, I judge my process. So, some things to talk through. Number one, like if you think about sales in four parts, that's kind of how I always like to talk through it. If you think about sales in four parts, number one is the opening. In other words, what's going on, right? So if there was a checkbox, and I do have a checkbox, but for the sake of time, I'll keep it brief. You know, did I did I create an environment in which this person felt comfortable? Number two, did I set the expectation on what we're going to cover today? Checkbox one, great. Checkbox two, great. Then I move into the second phase of the call. Did I uncover, in other words, did I information gather their problems? Because by having them have hyper awareness of their problems, it allows me to present a better solution naturally. And all the while I'm doing this, are the answers that they are giving me answers that have depth inside them, or are they surface level answers? Because we all know we've been on calls before where we know we're getting one word answers or they're vague, they're general, right? And it's not really going anywhere. And so my process, did I check enough boxes? That's why you'll often hear me say sales is just a series of check boxes. And the more that you check your boxes off, the likely that this person will enroll in your offer or your whatever it is that you're selling. And so if I know if I've done that well, I am not emotionally attached to the sale. I want to go on a little bit of a detour, but I promise it's relevant. I'm going somewhere with this. You ever hear that saying in the sales space, or it's something like, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something like, don't care, um, don't worry about don't worry about the income, the outcome will come, or don't worry about the outcome, the income will come to you. Anybody hear about something like that, right? It's fairly similar. Okay. And so essentially what it's trying to say is it's trying to say like when you're on a sales call, money, don't worry about the money. Don't think about the money. And when I hear that, I'll sometimes, I laugh. And the reason why is because like I call the biggest crock on that. Of course I care about the money. Like that would be insane for me to say I don't care. Oh, I want the money, right? I want the money. Does that make me a bad person? No, it doesn't. But here's what's interesting. Two two things can be true at the same time. What do I mean? What I mean by that is I can want the money and still want to help the person, correct? Yeah. And so, if two things can be true at the same time, that means that there is an order in which I get the money. In order for me to get the money, I need to make sure that I'm fully present with the person. Y'all tracking? And so that's why I often, when I hear that statement, I find it just kind of silly because I'm thinking about the money. But if I think about the person more, I know that by proxy, the money becomes more relevant, right? Let's do a little bit of another sanity check because we have a tighter room today. Mr. Brown, what are you thinking so far, man? What's going through your head?
Um, what I'm doing is I'm like, oh shit, that's what it was. Because I was doing these things instinctively in my prior career through sales.
Mm.
I would always ask, is this a bad time? So the no, now I just heard you say it lowers resistance.
Mhm.
Instead of saying, is it still a good time to get try it for a yes, I tried for a no. And I used to
Mhm.
preach, get seven no's and didn't really know why. So now I know why.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's just it, I think once you understand rejection has nothing to do with you. And
Yeah.
rejection in this game has everything to do with your process, right? They're not saying no to you. They're saying no to your process.
Yeah.
They're not saying, Ed, I don't like your glass. No, they're saying, I do not like what you are selling me. So again, fix your process, right?
Mhm.
So really insightful. Sergio, what you got, sir?
Yeah, I used to also think, the money thing, right? Until
Hmm.
one of a mentor said, we're always preaching mission over commission,
Hmm.
but it's not mission over commission. And so that the outcome is still there. You're still doing it for money. You still want the lifestyle, all that
100%.
stuff, right? So sometimes we feel like we have to serve more, eh, but not to get the sale. Like you want to give the information and you want to help people, but not do that. So it's never you don't want to do all that and never and it's not instead of commission. So really connection to what you said.
I love it. There is a back in 2015, I had three fitness studios in Jersey, and back in 2004, early 2014, when I first started my studios, I'll never forget, I had this guy Juan who came into our studios, and we were running a promo at the time, and it was like a get a free week kind of thing back then. And he came in, he took advantage of the free week and then left. We never saw him again, right? And then 2 years later or something like that. I was running a 6 week challenge, and I had this girl that I was training at the front desk, and I wanted to show her like, hey, here's how you dial out to customers and you have these conversations, that kind of thing. And so I pick up the phone call. I mean, I pick up the phone, I dial out, no one picks up, right? I'm like, okay, we'll just get the next one, whatever. I pick up the phone call again, no one picks up. Now I'm kind of like blushing a little bit because I'm like, all right, this ain't working, right? And so then I pick up the phone call again, and it was just I'm going by numbers naturally, and it's Juan, right? And I'm like, hey Juan, how's it going? Aaron at Tailor Made Bodies, it was our studio, Tailor Made Bodies. We're running a 6 week challenge, whatever. And then he goes, hey, I don't know if you remember, I used to, whatever. And I'm like, oh yeah, I remember now. And the reason why I remember because this was a heavy set gentleman. He was like north of 300 pounds. And I said, hey, Juan, you know what? I think this would be helpful after I learned where he was. He hadn't kind of regressed and stuff like that. And he said, no, I'm okay. Whatever. He was dealing with some things mentally. And so what's interesting is that about 6 months later, call it 6 months later, we get a call from Juan. And Juan's like, hey, I've been still getting your emails. And I said, well, listen, are you ready to come in and now and give this a shot? Yeah, I think we have some really things that you'd like here, whatever. Juan comes in, Juan drops like 120 pounds in like 18 months, right? He crushes it. Juan later ends up becoming, out of my three studios, my handyman because by trade, that's what he was really good at. And yet becoming an employee. And I can tell you something right now, I'll never forget it. He says to me, he has one of these conversations where he says to me, because of our studio and our program, it saved his life. And he was dealing with a lot of things. His grandmother died. And the reason why I'm sharing this with you is because it goes back to what you said, Sergio, which is you have to have, and I like the way this is framed. You might find this helpful to write down. You have to have mission-based systems. Think about that term, mission-based systems. I have found there are two categories of sales professionals and entrepreneurs. There are ones that are mercenaries, and then there's ones that are missionaries. All right, so I'll take you back to the military days, right? What's a mercenary? A mercenary, simply stated, is a person who comes in and gets a job done, and they're indifferent about the casualties along the way. They're just there to get a job done, right? A missionary is on a vision or a mission that is bigger than themselves, right? If you think about human excellence. And so when you think about what you guys are doing in whatever arena in which you're selling in, you have to be on a mission that is bigger than yourself. Because if you are in this to make a lot of money, I have no doubt you guys will make a lot of money. You will. But I can tell you, having done that, that flame dies out very fast. But if you're in this to help the most amount of people in whatever lateral that you are in, you can run that race for the rest of your life. And so, one thing I would have you consider, and I know everyone in this room has already done it and embodied it, is really have these mission-based systems. What do they want? And by proxy, you get what you want. Make sense, team? Cool. Paul, what you got? Oh, one more time, brother. Oh, I'm mute there.
There we go. Rejection reminds me a lot of striking out and in baseball. And I remember in college, I was like so afraid to strike out that I would swing at pitches early in the count that weren't necessarily my pitches, but I was like, at least I didn't strike out.
Yeah.
And it's like not following the process in the sales call. And it's like, oh, I'm 1 foot in, 1 foot out. Like at least I, didn't get a no when you didn't maybe pitch the full price. And it's just
Right.
like getting to a place of like, yeah, I struck out. I didn't see anything that I was looking for. The pitcher just beat me, and just being indifferent about that makes so
Mhm.
much more sense to me because it also translates like 30% close rate on a high tier, high price offer and hitting 300. It's a lot of rejection.
Tons of it.
And it's just, yeah, I don't know, for whatever reason, reframing it that way makes me want to go back to like, okay, how can I finish every sales call knowing that I stuck to my process?
Yes, 100%. It has to be your process, right? I love that. You know, because it's funny, these guys, these top guys I was telling you about that do a little over 500,000, it's not because they're not fearless. They're not fearless. It's because if you think about it, they've just literally trained their nervous system to stop equating no with failure. That's it. They don't see that as failure. And what's interesting is that as sales professionals, I can tell, raise my hand and I can tell you I've confidently done this. When I don't sell, if I go on five, six no's, instinctively, what I do on the next call is I just try to force it. I try to go harder, right? Has anybody ever done that? Right? Yeah, it's okay, right? And what's interesting about that is that the harder you do it, the less progress you make and the more you fail, right? Anybody in this room ever hear, just raise your hand, you ever hear of the backwards law? No, you might find this interesting. So when I was in the military, one thing that they used to do, well, they still do, but I went through is there was an exercise where they would just pretty much bind our wrists and they would bind our ankles. And what they would do is they would push us in like a 9 foot pool, right? And what's interesting is that those guys that got pushed into the pool, there's two classes. Some guys actually died during this exercise, but there was the first class of people, they would thrash, they would flail, they would go crazy. And the dive instructors would have to obviously pull them out and they would fail and they would churn out of the program. But then there was a second class of people who knew something that the first class didn't know. And what they knew was that if they allowed their body to just naturally fall to the base of the pool, and then the moment that their toes touched the bottom, they sprung up. And then the moment that their lips came over the water, they took a deep breath of water and then they allowed themselves to gradually go back down and they stayed calm, that they would ultimately end up, it was a 5 minute drill. They would ultimately end up going on to the next path. And so, what does that mean for you? What that means for you is that the pitcher who tries to throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball and can't do it instinctively tries to grip it harder and rip his arm off in the process, which means what? Less is more. And so, when you're experiencing failure, the idea isn't to go harder, grip tighter. The idea is to lean back and have this kind of if you can imagine relaxed state. It's not train harder because that is how you fail faster. Does that make sense, team? Right. And so I think about that a lot because that's often the answer for a lot of things when you're not seeing success. We instinctively want to do more, double the output. Right. There's an interesting statistic by Crankwheel. They had a statistic where they said like 92% of salespeople, what they'll do is that whether you're in your follow-up systems, whether someone's in your pipeline, they will often give up after the fifth attempt. While 8% of the salespeople, the ones that would persist, they end up securing 80% of the sales. And so, what does that mean? What that stat literally proves to this conversation is that with resilience, calm resilience, and the willingness to face rejection in spite of, you win, especially in this arena. And so, again, every no that you hear is just proof that you're doing the job. You're asking, you're leading people, right? You're creating like these decision points in people's brains. And I think, when you hear no, what that ultimately means is I don't feel as if that I'm not saying no to you, Sergio. What I'm saying is I'm saying no to your process, not yet to your process, Brandy. I don't fully understand it, Paul. Right? Ed, I am scared for whatever reason. And so what you're dealing with the I want to do it, but your job is to change that but to and. You have to change the association. I want to do this and I'd like to move forward and versus this sounds good, but you guys see the idea here? And so again, as far as like strategies and ways to think about this for you guys into your next series of sales calls, because in the beginning of the year, you guys will face a ton of rejection throughout the rest of the year. I would recommend, have a specific goal. I don't care if it's weekly, it could be monthly, but have a specific goal where you're getting no responses. Because what you're doing, guys, like what I mentioned before, you are training your nervous system. So the next time you hear a no, you're not so hard on the people that matter most to you. And you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Because one no, all of a sudden, you don't become the nicest persons to people that actually care about you. It changes your whole day. It's okay. I know we've all been there. I've been there before. My wife will say to me, she'll go, all right, you're clearly in a mood. And and then she'll walk away because she knows that, this is years ago, but she'll know that if somebody said no to me, I would wear it right on my sleeve, right? Because I didn't train my nervous system to know that I will be fine. That person won't, but I will be fine because I did everything in my power. But I think also intrinsically, you should be celebrating rejection. Kind of weird to say. Because if you think about it, every no literally brings you closer to the yes. Why? Because that's data, that's feedback. And so when you're leaning into it, you can figure out what went well, what you need to focus on, what you need to get rid of. You are literally training your reticular activating system, your filtration system, right? What should I discard? What should I double down on the next call? And I think the third thing is that you have to be able to. I was having a conversation with Eli, and we were one of our just a random conversations in the week, and I had a sales call, and I'll never forget this. This was like 2 years ago, and I was like, "Hey, man," and he was like, "How'd the call go?" And I was like, "I didn't close. I missed." And he goes, "You didn't close?" And I'm like, "Nah, I missed." And then the next thing that came out of my mouth was, the reality is, dude, I got like 2 or 3 meetings and I wasn't mentally there, so I started making excuses, right? And then what's interesting is he then said to me, he goes, "Aaron, do you believe that you can close every single person on this earth?" And almost instinctually, I said, "Yep, I can do it. I can close every single." Now, is that true? Of course not. Of course it's not true. But that's the perspective and the lens through which you must see the world. Because what's the alternative? To doubt myself, to say to myself, like, yeah, maybe I will, maybe I won't. You guys have heard me say, I truly subscribe to the idea that I am the best sales trainer in the world. Is that true? Of course it's not. But what's the alternative? And so I think this is the lens in which you have to see yourself, that every single person that you speak to is in your program already. They just don't know it. Is this helpful, team, as we talk through this? Yeah, sweet. Brady, what are you thinking about?
No, I think I like this. So I think that it's, I need to get some more no's.
Got to get some more
I gotta
no's.
celebrate some more no's because like, yeah, in my head I was like, yeah, I think I should have been able to close that person. Every person I don't close, I'm like, I did X, but like, now I want to be able to just be like, oh, okay. No.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And as long as your process is good, then we need to be okay with the no. Of course we can improve. There's always room for improvement, right? But if you're leaving that call knowing that there was a version of you that stepped into their world, appreciated where were, but bought their story, right? On how much money they did or did not have, on how much time they did or did not have, then you provided zero value to that person's life. So in those scenarios, it's easy to get down on yourself because you didn't do your job. You didn't stick to your process. But in scenarios where you were able to present all the information and make sure that they left that call with clarity and you were able to help them, and even though they weren't make a decision, feel good in knowing statistically speaking, you will win more than you lose. So this is just part of that journey, right? Ed, what are you thinking about, man?
I'm sitting here thinking, so what I'm thinking, and I got a question. So what I'm
Mhm.
thinking is, what I heard you say is, do you believe you can close anyone?
Mhm.
Yeah. See it as done, see them in the program, see them in the end already complete. And
So good.
then that way, like that resonated with me big time.
So good. I love it, man. Really
Yeah.
good. What's your question?
Yeah. My question is something Paul said. He said, I was swinging at pitches that weren't mine.
Mm.
And I'm like, huh, I would love if there's time for him to explain what that means. Because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about.
Oh yeah, heck yeah, for sure. Paul, give it to us.
We're talking in sales or talking in uh
No, when you were talking about where you're playing baseball, you said I was afraid to strike out and I would swing at pitches that weren't mine. And it immediately went to,
Mm.
am I talking to ideal clients that aren't mine? Probably so. Or like I was trying to like wonder if you could explain that a little bit or talk to it.
Yeah, totally. And it's like sales and marketing are so connected. So if let's say I'm like in a poor streak, my email might go from, hey, are you a dad that wants to show up for your kids in the best way, but you know that your high cholesterol and your high blood pressure has you risk at a heart attack? Like that's a very
Mm.
specific avatar. And then it's like, oh man, I've been getting a lot of I got to talk to my wife, so let me target someone a little bit broader. And I might come in with stories where it's like, you're tired of getting dumped by ladies, because you're this single nerd in the basement, right? And like
Mm.
that's a different avatar, different problem. I'm trying to avoid the rejection and the problem of let me talk to my spouse by saying, oh, well, let me just target someone who doesn't have a spouse, right? Or I might get on that sales call and I'm like, oh, he doesn't really see the value in, identity shift through an alter ego. Let me just pitch him on X, Y, and Z, as
Mm.
opposed to knowing like what I've got. And, it could also be like, oh, this guy's 24. He said that, money's tight. Let me just pitch him a different price. Right? It's like it's all these different ways, and it's like, dude, you're literally swinging at a slider down and away when you're hunting
Yeah.
a fastball. What are you doing?
All right, bet. Thank you.
Yeah.
So good. Love it. Yeah, and so I think the more that you lean into this idea of no and just giving it a different meaning, what you're doing is you are literally positively reframing it in your brain. And I think this isn't kind of like woo-woo stuff. What you're doing is you're training your brain to see the world through a glass half full perspective. And it's easier said than done, right? Like there's so many reasons why finding no is a lot easier than finding yes, right? And so like we dip into the realm of this like positive thinking, but I think it's so fundamentally important. And the reason why is because like I always talk about this idea that, your language, like say if you hear a no, right? Your language is the programming that your brain runs. But what the crazy part about that is your brain is consistently eavesdropping on your language. This is why I find it wild, right? When somebody will like, you ever do something like I don't care recreationally, educationally, whatever it is, and you say to your friend, your buddy, your girlfriend, you go, yeah, yeah, I'm never good at these things, right? Or you go like, yeah, this shot from the free throw line, like I'm awful at these, right? Why would you literally speak that out loud and then continue to do the thing that you're not good at? It's crazy to me. I also find it interesting here, and this is kind of how no leads into other areas of your life. Um, you know, I'll give you like a really good example here. Sergio, let me hear from you, sir, just to kind of make my point full circle, right? So Sergio, have you ever had a conversation with someone where you had to uplift them because they weren't having like a good day or a bad situation, sir?
every day.
Okay, sweet. So you do this almost every day then, right? And from an adjectives perspective, what are some of the adjectives that you would try to use to someone that you're speaking to that isn't having a good day?
Well, I think it's going to connect back to your nose right now. I was just writing some stuff. And I think it's a great question. Um, Understanding like being an entrepreneur, right? We hear no's all the time. And a lot of the people that I work with are moving from corporate America or having a job into entrepreneur. And they have to first understand that at a job, you hear no all the time. Your boss tells you can't go on vacation when you want, you can't get the raise you want, you can't buy the car
Mhm.
you want, like, but they get used to hearing that no's and they're just used to living that life.
Yeah.
But
And
when
you
you're
and what's crazy, I love that because what's crazy is that when you have your conversations with your team and they're like, "Hey, Sergio, I'm really feeling down." You might say to them, you might say things like, "You're so much better than this. You got this, right? I've seen how you've worked through this before. Brighter days are coming." Right? These are all talk tracks that we've given to other people. So here's my question. Why are we so quick to give it to other people, but we're the first ones to put ourselves down? That's fascinating. Like extremely. And so I think all of this stuff goes hand in hand. That when it comes to, the power of tongue and how people have heard this all through social media, they hear this all the time, but they don't recognize how damaging it is to their overall well-being. I can go down a rabbit hole, on this. There's things I've talked about when it comes to, and by the way, this is very subjective, and so know that I'm not calling anybody out when I say this, but I'm just giving you another example that you can appreciate this from. Like in the sales space, one thing that I will often hear, and I do not judge anyone on this, I just want to be clear, but I will often hear a lot of people will use profane language, right? And they will curse every F and P and S and T, and it's coming out right through their pores. And what's interesting to me is that communication is an art form. And if you are truly in love with this art form, then you will realize that when I hear somebody using that type of language, to me, that is verbal laziness. That's all that it signals to me. It's an exclamation, but it's an expletive, but it's not an exclamation, right? What you are signaling to me is that you do not have another way than which you can articulate your point, and so you have to resort to that. And I can tell you something right now, people are picking, I'm coming up right now, mama, okay? People are picking up on this, right? And so got to take my daughter to the dentist, right? And so people are picking up on this. And so again, I think I just want to be clear on that. Whether you do or whether you don't is not for me to say. But one thing I can say is that I have seen more people who, you ever meet someone or hear from someone, you're like, man, I don't know what it is about this person, but they're magnetic, right? I don't know. Yeah, we've all done it. I can tell you right now, if you've experienced that, they probably did not use profane language, right? Because those are words that are not pleasing to the brain. The last point I want to make on this is that I'm going to give an extreme example, but I just want to make my point. I can unequivocally say that no one in this room would do hard drugs like things like heroin or things like that, right? Naturally, you would instinctively say, no, get it out of here. But if I tried to make the parallel example that doing hard drugs is just as bad as using profane language, you might say, Aaron, I can't see the connection. Well, here's my argument. That is a toxic thing you are putting in your body. The same is true for the words that you use. You embody what you say. And so one thing I would encourage you to guys to do, whether it's language or whether it's just positive talk, I would really encourage you to stand guard at the door of your mind, specifically for this year. If you just elevate the way in which you communicate about yourself and then how that translates to others, it's no surprise why you become more magnetic, you become more influential, and you start to be seen to others as someone who kind of floats above the rest, right? Is this helpful today, team? Beautiful. Sweet. Awesome. All right. Well, I got a 7-year-old with a cavity I got to tackle. So that's my next 90 minutes. But thanks for hanging out with me, team. Hopefully, you guys got some value. Um, if you guys did get some value, here's what I'd love is in the school channel, in this transformational school channel, if you everyone should be in that room. Go ahead and drop one takeaway that you got from today's call so others can see it and so they can catch the replay as well. And I will see you guys on Friday, 11 a.m. Eastern, when we run skills and drills. Cheers. Bye now.